So this video is my third installment of the Who's That Girl series, and I want to make sure that I do my very best to give those of you who are subscribed to the channel an opportunity to get to know me a little better, just share my personal testimony with you, and do my best to give God all the glory for what He has done in my life. Romans 8:28 says, "All things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purposes." And my life is truly a testimony of how the Lord has used all things, good and bad, to bring me to where I am today. He has wasted absolutely nothing. And so this particular video covers my life from the ages of 18 to 23. This is my undergraduate collegiate experience, and here is where the trauma from my childhood began to manifest itself in many different ways. So like I said on the last video, I left my aunt's house, but the trauma of her house didn't leave me. In fact, those years spent under her roof, basically me living in survival mode, helped to morph my personality and character into someone God never intended for me to be. Cold, hard-hearted, mistrusting, no confidence, mean-spirited, short-tempered, and violent. We can only pour from the abundance of what is in our cup at any given time. So because I'd spent the past decade of my life in a household filled with negativity, it was no wonder I stepped onto my new college campus carrying all of that negativity and literally wearing it like a garment everywhere I went. So again, I left her house, but her house didn't leave me. So here we go. The College of New Jersey. The College of New Jersey. Overall, a beautiful experience. Some good, some bad, but all of it has helped me. All of it has helped me to grow. And so although I was new to the campus in 1998, I actually already knew my freshman roommate. She and I had met back in high school at the PACE engineering program I attended on Saturdays. And she seemed pretty cool. We both realized that we had applied to the College of New Jersey and we both got accepted. So we went about the process of trying to make sure that we were one another's roommates, and we were able to do that. So I was excited to know at least one person on the campus. My college courses were pretty much general education courses that year, but I actually also began to take a few classes that were within my major of communication studies, and I did really well in those, so I was excited about that. I was never allowed to date or really socialize in high school, and this actually proved to be a real problem when I got to college, because instead of being heavily focused on my academics, I was far more concerned with partying, going to clubs, and meeting new dudes. Okay. I was just a hot fire mess, and in retrospect, it's totally understandable. When you haven't had an opportunity to do what young people do, to just go out, maybe go out on your first date, go out with a group of friends. I just wasn't allowed to do any of that. And so by the time I got to school, it was just kind of like, I've been studying and getting good grades all my life. That's not my priority right now. Right now, where's the party at? That's my question. Where are the dudes? Where are the guys? And it was just a sad situation because that's not where my head should have been. But instead, that's exactly where it was. I ended up losing my virginity to a very tall, handsome frat boy clown. Okay? I don't have many regrets in my life, but I truly wish that I'd valued my body more during that time. He was so unworthy of such an invaluable gift. However, when you are the victim of childhood sexual abuse, it is virtually impossible for you to view yourself as worthy of anything good. And so my self-esteem was not where it needed to be at all. And so along with that came a willingness to entertain people who shouldn't have really gotten anything other than a hello from me. right? You know, when you look back, you're able to be like, yo, like how did you even get in my space? You know what I mean? You just were not even on the level. But yet he was. You know, when you don't have a full understanding of who you are, your identity is not rooted in Christ. You don't know how valuable you are to the Lord. Oh yeah. These low level dudes and these low level females, they come into your sphere and you accept them and you receive them because you don't know who you are. In addition, because I wasn't saved, there was no possible way to know about soul ties and the long lasting ramifications of fornicating with multiple people, right? We're always conditioned to be concerned about sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancies, but the church never seems to mention the demonic oppression that ungodly soul ties bring into your life. You know, I had no idea. I had no idea, but had I known, I would have chosen better. One of my closest friends on campus, and we are actually still extremely close to this day, was a guy. And so friendship with him over the years was truly a gift because I learned a lot about young men. I learned how some of them think, and I got to see how many of them move. And I learned very quickly that, unbeknownst to women, men can actually gossip just as much as we do, if not more. Okay, so him and his friends would talk about various young women on campus, and I have to be honest, it was truly cringeworthy. Okay, so many of these young women on campus looked so beautiful and confident on the outside, but to hear about the things that they would engage in behind closed doors with guys on campus just helped me to understand that things weren't always as they seemed, right? The people highest up really do have the lowest self-esteem, right? All these hot girls on campus who just look so confident and so beautiful, they're out here doing the absolute most with these guys in order to be seen, in order to be valued, in order to be noticed, in order to be acknowledged. And it was just interesting to me. So unlike many of the young women on campus, I decided very early on to do my dirt off campus. So while it may have appeared to many that I was just some good girl with no prospects who got no play, the truth of the matter is I was busy having quite the fun, but I made sure that I was dealing with guys who did not attend my school and, as far as I knew, did not know anyone on my campus. I just really didn't want my name mixed up in any low-level scandals on campus, and I wasn't interested in being the topic of discussion with any of these dudes who talked way too much. So it's not that I was some goody-goody. I was just wise enough to decide very early on, I don't want these people up in my business. And if I'm going to do my dirt, they're not going to know nothing about it. So I had a group of friends, associates, but the truth of the matter is I also had a chip on my shoulder, right? I also had trouble trusting people. And so due to my trauma, I was always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, I didn't have any great expectations of people. And I never really allowed myself to get to a point where I could really experience a sisterhood with any of them. You know, in retrospect, my relationships with them were all very surface for a while. You know, we would go to the movies, we would go to a few parties, we would go to wing night at the local hangout spots, hang out in the dorm rooms from time to time. It took me a little while to really let people in. And then even then, it was just a chosen few. Because deep down, I really wasn't a fan of people, right? I'd learned early on just how foul people could really be, starting with my own parents. So I didn't have all these high hopes of meeting people who would be trustworthy, loving, and kind toward me. And I hope you're understanding what I'm saying by that. It's sad, but I want to make sure I tell the testimony in its fullness. You know, I want you to really understand what was going on in my heart and in my mind during this time. In full transparency, I had a bad attitude. I had a stank attitude, and I just wasn't really all that approachable in college. However, there were a chosen few who kind of pressed past my hard exterior to actually get to know me, and those are people that I am friends with to this day. However, most people judge me from afar. They took one look at my face. I always looked like I was sucking on lemons. And they made up in their minds, I wasn't anyone they wanted to get to know. And, perhaps my disposition was off-putting. And truth be told, I was perfectly fine with that. I wasn't really on a champagne campaign to make friends or be popular. And when it came to people, I really could take or leave them. Like I just, some people want so badly to be seen. They want so badly to be liked. They want so badly to be popular. That just wasn't me. You know what I mean? Back in the day, there was a rapper. His name was Notorious B.I.G. And he came out with a song, and it was Mo Money, Mo Problems. But I was always of the mind that it wasn't Mo Money, Mo Problems. It was Mo People, Mo Problems. You understand what I'm saying? And I just didn't want a whole bunch of people around me. And that's not a good thing, brothers and sisters. That's not a good thing. But it's how I felt because of all the trauma that I'd gone through. And that's what I mean by the trauma of my household following me right onto my college campus. So I had no value for my body because of the molestation that I had endured. I had no value for relationships with people because of so many broken relationships, growing up, starting with my parents. And because I was denied the opportunity to have any type of social life while I was in high school, my priorities were all mixed up when I got to college. I was tired of being the focused academic. I was ready to kick back and party. Bottom line, I was ready to party. And it couldn't have been a worse time, you know what I mean? Because college isn't free. So basically, you're paying a whole bunch of money to go party, and it shouldn't be that way. And because I didn't come from money or really have any money, I wasn't one of the best dressed girls on campus. I wasn't happy or confident within myself, and food was more so a comfort. So during my freshman year, they say, they'll gain the freshman 15. Yeah, I probably packed on about 30 pounds that full year. So for fall and spring semester, I probably packed on about 30 to 35 pounds easy. I received calls from my sister every now and again to my dorm room, so we were in touch. She also came to visit the campus a couple of times. I didn't hear much from my mother during my freshman year of college. And I also didn't hear much from my dad either. And so honestly, I really don't know what they were doing. I just say they were busy doing whatever they were doing. It's also important to note that in 1996, my father took my uncle to court and got full custody of my 11-year-old brother at the time. So at that time, my sister was in college, but I was still in high school in New Jersey. And even though my dad went to go get full custody of my brother, there was absolutely no discussion whatsoever to come get custody of me. And so it's important that I note that. Also important to note is that on Christmas morning of 1997, his wife passed away suddenly while she was asleep. So 1997, all of 1998, and much of 1999, I heard from my dad and I saw my dad, but he just wasn't the same. He was just most definitely going through his own thing. And to be perfectly candid with you, I was focused on trying to carve out a life for myself. Because it was just very clear to me that I had no real safety net in either of my parents. So I didn't really speak to my aunt often because I rarely called her. And I made myself scarce whenever she called me. So anytime she called my dorm room, it was really to inquire of my whereabouts, what I was doing, just really get the down low on my life, right? There was one time she called and she asked for the passwords to my college account online so that she could log on to see my grades because our grades were being posted electronically. Needless to say, she and I got into it because I told her point blank, my grades are my business. I didn't feel like she needed to have access to my account to view my grades. I reminded her that I was a young adult, and most of all, I reminded her that this college education was my bill. And because she wasn't paying for anything, I would ultimately share my grades when I was ready to, if I was ever ready to. Right? I have to be honest with you. It wasn't about me feeling myself, and it wasn't about me being disrespectful. It was about me being a young adult willing to set boundaries and require folks to honor them. Okay? Because at this point, you're talking to an 18-year-old young adult. Controlling people don't have any boundaries, and it's always very important to never give them an inch, otherwise, they will take a mile. I just felt like it was a last-ditch effort for her to attempt to control something in my life once again, and I just wasn't trying to have it. Not again. You don't need my password. You don't need access to my grades. Let me do my thing. So overall, freshman year was just kind of a pretty average year at school, nothing too monumental. At the end of freshman year, I ended up going back to my aunt's house with the intention of working during the summer to save up some money. In my mind, if you work during the summer, you save up some money, and then perhaps when you come back to campus, you get a job, save up some money, by the next summer, you won't even have to go back there. But I definitely didn't have what I needed in order to avoid my aunt's house that summer. So I ended up right back there. And let me just say, I wasn't there for more than a week before all hell broke loose. Okay? One evening, my college roommate called me to ask if I wanted to go with her to a party in Asbury Park. Okay. I told her that I was down to go, but that I needed to check with my aunt first and then I would call her back. So I went to tell my aunt about the party and just make sure it was okay if I attended. My aunt told me that it was fine for me to go, but that I needed to be back in the house by 11 p.m. At which point I told her the party didn't even start until about 11 p.m. At which point she says to me, well, then I guess you won't be going. Okay. So now, after having been away at college all year long, coming and going as I pleased, and not having to ask or check with a soul about what I could do or when, this verbal exchange with her was awkward and just simply not something I was used to. Okay. So I called my roommate and I told her that I wouldn't be able to join her at the party. And then I went downstairs to our little den basement area where I could be alone, and I called my best friend to talk to him. At some point, he asked me what I was up to that evening, and I mentioned to him that I would have been headed to a party, but that my aunt had given me a curfew of 11 p.m. I also went on to express to him that her rules were ridiculous, and I really wasn't up for the foolishness all summer. Okay. The conversation with him lasted probably about 10 minutes, and I ended up just going to bed early that evening. What I did not know was that my conversation with my friend had been recorded. Okay. My aunt had connected some type of device to the phone and literally recorded the entire conversation I had with him. Okay. I wouldn't learn that until the following day. The following day, there was some type of family barbecue going on at the house, and multiple people had come for the event. And why do I feel like it was Memorial Day? Because I know it was May. I do. I feel like it was Memorial Day. And so that's not my actual family in the picture. I just kind of want you to check the scene. Okay? Because what should have been an event with food, family, and fun turned into an opportunity for my aunt to grandstand. Okay? She decided to use that time to bring up what happened the night before in front of our family members. And she told them that I was talking about her like a dog to my friend the night before. Then she played the recording of my friend and I. And next she proceeded to tell me in front of everyone that if I didn't like her rules, that I could get out of her house. And here's the thing about controlling people. They always push the envelope and attempt to bully others when they genuinely believe they can get away with it. But on that day, after learning that she'd gone so low as to violate my privacy in such an egregious manner, I knew it was absolutely time for me to go. So I told her that I would not be staying in her house to abide by her ridiculous rules all summer long. Okay. I told her that I was a responsible 19-year-old young woman who was interested in working hard and socializing throughout the summer. And if that went against her rules, not a problem. I then asked her to give me the grace of 24 hours and promised her that I would most definitely be out of her house by then. I excused myself from that area and went to a quiet place in the house to call my father. Okay. I told my dad what happened and that I needed some place to live. Interestingly enough, he immediately began to hem and haw about just how much I needed to just chill and get adjusted to my aunt's rules again for a few weeks, and before I knew it, I'd be back at school. But I immediately shut him down because this was one time I needed him to come through for me. I didn't want to hear anything about working things out with my aunt or staying in Fairhaven, New Jersey. I was ready to leave and I wasn't trying to reconsider. I'd had enough of that household and all of the dysfunction in it. So I told him point blank, you be here tomorrow to get me and my belongings. This is a done deal and I need a place to stay this summer until I go back to school, period. So he told me he would be there around 1 o'clock the following afternoon. The next thing I did was called my best friend from high school, and I asked her to come get me around 8:30, 9 o'clock the following morning. The plan was for us to do breakfast, spend some time together, and me just fill her in on what was going on because I was going to be moving out of state permanently. And then I also just wanted to be out of the house all morning until I was sure my father was there. I had absolutely no words for my aunt, and I just didn't want to give her an opportunity to make this situation any worse than what it already was. So that's what happened. My best friend came early in the morning. We went, we got something to eat, we rocked out, we vibed. I told her, what was going down. And by the time we got back to the house, my best friend dropped me off. I saw my dad's car in the driveway. When I went into the house, my dad and my aunt were already talking. Apparently, she'd expressed to him that I was disrespectful and couldn't stay there anymore. It was almost as though she was trying to spin the narrative to make it look like she was putting me out, when the truth was she gave me an ultimatum that included dealing with being controlled over the next 8 weeks or getting out of her house, and I chose to leave. Easy breezy. Don't tempt me with a good time, honey. Stay here with you and your husband for what? 19 years old, being told I got to be in the house by 11 p.m.? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So my dad helped me pack my stuff into his car. I respectfully said goodbye to my aunt, and that was literally the last time she and I lived under the same roof. Enough was enough. I had had enough. I didn't say too much in the car ride with my dad on the way back to Harlem. But I know by the time we got to the George Washington Bridge and crossed over into the state of New York, I felt like I was at home. And for me, there really was no place like home. Harlem was home to me. So we parked the car, and we began to unload my belongings into what would be my new home on 121st Street in Harlem with my dad and my brother. That summer, I signed up with Robert Half International Temp Agency, and I got some pretty great work experience as a receptionist for UBS Warburg, it's UBS now, and Spence Chapin Adoption Agency in New York City. I was thriving, I was working, I was independent, and I felt like a young adult. Interestingly enough, there was no laundry list of rules living with my dad, but I conducted myself like a young lady all summer and barely went out unless it was with my sister. So for me, it wasn't necessarily about the partying. It was about being treated like a young adult and not a child, having the freedom to make my own decisions and figure out what was best for me. I was never the club hopper. I was never the party chick. Even freshman year, when I was just starting to get a little taste of freedom, I went to a party here, I went to a party there. I was looking for dudes, fine, but I never was the one that was like, I can't miss a party. I have to be in every dude's face. I just wanted a little taste of what I had been deprived of. And I just thought it was really interesting that when I moved in with my dad, just going out with my sister from time to time was perfectly fine with me. I was focused on working. I was focused on being responsible. I was focused on saving money, Because I didn't live in my aunt's house anymore, and I knew that my state financial aid depended on having a New Jersey address, I asked my college roommate's parents if I can use their address, and they were gracious enough to allow me to do so. So that leads us into sophomore year at college. And listen, sophomore year was interesting to say the very least. In a nutshell, just think immature, mean girl behavior. Okay, I had a chip on my shoulder, a temper like none other. I was very impatient with people and ended up threatening to physically beat up this girl who lived in my dorm. She called my dorm room talking crazy, and I told her I was on my way to her room. I just really wasn't about all the long talking. I told her to hold that thought, and when I get to your room, let's pick this up. It was one of those. I get to her room, I'm yelling, I'm screaming, I'm cursing. She wouldn't open the door. I just had a really short fuse back then, and I just kind of felt like, you know what? She should have never called my room to say half of what she had to say. But the truth of the matter is, at the age of 19, going into the age of 20, emotional intelligence was what I lacked. You know, people are always going to push your buttons, but that doesn't mean you have to respond. But again, coming from the household I came from, yelling, cursing, and acting a plumb fool was the norm, right? So I was being trained on how to communicate with people. And the best way to communicate with people was to curse them out and threaten to whoop their behinds, because that's what I was used to, right? So before that whole ridiculous drama was concluded, I'm in front of a judge. Literally, I'm standing in front of a judge being told that threatening bodily harm to someone is a crime and being warned not to ever do it again, because she took me to court for that. It was just a hot fire mess. Okay. And again, in full transparency, as I look back on it, the situation was so childish and stupid. She had violated first. But by the age of 19 or 20, there should have been a built-in regulator of emotions that kept me from responding to her as ignorantly as I did. Right? But when you're raised in an environment of violence and yelling and threatening, those are the go-to points instead of other more effective ways of communicating with people. So again, when I say I left my aunt's house, but her house didn't leave me, this is just one of the many examples. Academically, sophomore year was a bust. And somewhere along the line, my overall grade point average dropped below the requirement. A letter went out toward the end of the year to alert me that I needed to take summer courses to bring it back up to be in right standing for my junior year. But because my mail was going out to someone else's house, and none of them bothered to alert me that I had received mail, I spent the entire summer temping in the accounts receivable department of a successful air conditioning company in Long Island City, New York, instead of being on campus taking classes. So while I'm busy stacking my coins and all excited to be making good money, I had no idea that I actually needed to be on campus taking classes to bring my GPA back up so that I would not be academically dismissed. So in late July, I went online to log onto the website to register for classes for my junior year, and my passwords wouldn't work. So I called the registrar's office to find out if they were having some type of technical difficulty with the system. And they told me point blank, no, there's no technical difficulties at all. You've been academically dismissed from the college because of your low GPA and failure to bring it up over the summer. And I'm thinking to myself, failure to bring it up over the summer? I didn't even know I needed to bring it up over the summer. Listen, I was just absolutely crushed and frantic. I don't know, brothers and sisters. It's one of those things where college for me was like it. It was the answer for me, just getting out there, making my own money, and having a good life. There was nothing in me that felt like if you don't make it, you're going to be okay because you have people to fall back on. And when I tell you nothing in me felt that way, absolutely nothing. It was basically like, Dorothy, if you don't do this thing called life, you are not going to have anything because no one is coming to save you. So I called the director of the EOF program that I was in, and I explained to him what happened. And he told me to stay by my phone and that he would give me a call back. About 20 minutes later, he called me, and the first thing he said was, "You owe me your firstborn." He was able to get me readmitted into school based on his personal recommendation and my commitment to keeping my GPA above the requirement. He warned me that this would be my last chance, and upon returning to campus, I needed to be focused solely on school. And I promised him that I would not squander the opportunity and that I would handle my business. In retrospect, every time I think of this story, I am reminded of the favor of God and how even before I was saved, He was at work in my life, making a way out of no way and showing me unmerited favor. Because the truth of the matter is, I absolutely deserved to be academically dismissed from that school. But here I was being given another chance, and I was determined to make good on my promise to Him and myself. So my junior year was really strong. And ultimately, it's because I simply didn't have the luxury of focusing on anything other than my academics, so I did extremely well. During that year at school, I was more so a loner. I didn't have time to socialize, but I was so appreciative of my second chance at school that it didn't really even matter. That following summer, right before my senior year, I was back in New York City again, staying with my dad, working to make money and build my resume. I had a plan, okay? Back then, a lot of college students would typically use the summers to travel and just have fun. And those who did get jobs kind of got jobs at, menial places, the local burger joint or the retail store at the mall. But I was very strategic. I understood that temping at different organizations was going to give me the type of corporate experience I could add to my resume and actually stand out amongst the competition when it came time to find a job after graduation. Even if it was a receptionist position or an accounts receivable position, something administrative, for me, it looked better than Burger King, right? And so I'm like, you know what? Do what you can to stand out. Like, I was just very focused on my future, brothers and sisters. And the reason why I include this in the testimony is because I just want you to put all the pieces together. Money wasn't necessarily my God, but I saw money as a way to be okay. Right? I saw money as a way to be independent. And in order to get to the money, I was going to need to get that degree. So at my school, there was something called a housing lottery, and housing was guaranteed for freshmen and sophomores. However, juniors and seniors were kind of thrown into a lottery, and depending on if your name was listed, you either had on-campus housing or you didn't have any housing, and you had to figure that out. As chance would have it, going into my senior year, I didn't make the housing lottery. So I had to find housing off campus for my senior year or commute to class from my sister's apartment in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Now, I didn't mind the commute, but it just wasn't the most convenient. And once again, God's mighty hand was at work behind the scenes to give me favor. I happened to have an amazing academic advisor who reached out to me with an opportunity that almost seemed too good to be true. Another professor and colleague of hers at the college who taught classes in the fall but traveled in the spring semester needed a responsible student to basically condo sit. You know what I mean? Like, watch his condo. He needed someone to live there, keep it clean, and take care of his cat while he was away. The condo was located about 25 minutes from campus, and this was a great opportunity for me to have free housing near the campus. The problem was I didn't have a car yet. So I agreed to condo sit for the professor because I didn't think obtaining a car would be a big deal. With the money I had saved up, I could afford a car payment on a new vehicle, or I could definitely outright purchase a hoopty if I needed to. So I wasn't concerned about being able to afford a car. So in late July, my senior year was starting in August. Me, my sister, and my mother, who was in town visiting, went to a car dealership in New Jersey to see if I could go get into a new car, if I can get a loan for a new car. After running my credit, they decided that they would not lease me the vehicle because I didn't have any credit. Now, I had heard of not getting a lease due to poor credit, but I had never heard of not getting a loan because of no credit. And so needless to say, I was just highly upset. They would not give me the loan because I had no credit history. And I needed a car in order to take advantage of this opportunity to stay at the condo spring semester, and it just wasn't looking too promising. So as we're leaving the car dealership, I'm in the car with my sister's driving, and I'm crying. I felt defeated. I felt frustrated. I felt like nothing ever just went smoothly for me. I was just tired of feeling like I had to scratch, claw, and fight for everything. And I was just upset. And at some point, my mom, who was sitting in the back seat, begins to try to console me. She tells me that everything's going to be okay and everything's going to work out for me. And I really don't know what came over me. But I whipped around and I proceeded to literally curse her out. And it was as though every bit of venom within me from the age of 7 up until that point came oozing out. And it was just ugly, bitter, and disgusting. And I took that opportunity to remind her just how absent she'd been the majority of my life and just how much I've always had to struggle because she was such a terrible mother. And I told her how tired of her and my father I was, and how it seemed like they only showed up in just enough time to post up for the celebrations of my achievements, but they were never around while I was in the trenches fighting tooth and nail to make something of myself. I just went off on her, and it was just really bad. And to be honest with you, you could have heard a mouse pee on a cotton ball in that car when I was done, because it was beyond silent in there. There was just nothing left for anyone to say. I just sucked all of the air out of the car. And my poor sister just looked so horrified. Because again, no matter what our parents had or hadn't done, my sister and I had always shown them honor and respect. So to hear me completely lose it on my mom was very unnerving for her. So my sister dropped my mom and I off at her apartment, and she didn't come in. And I would, learn later that she went for a drive just to clear her mind, because what had gone on in the car was just emotionally too much for her. And so my mom and I went into the apartment, and I immediately went to the bedroom and just cried myself to sleep. I was so emotionally overwhelmed, brothers and sisters. I was so overwhelmed. I knew that what I'd done was just so wrong. But it was just, it's hard to explain. But when I say it was literally pent up frustration and sadness and all of it just overflowing. So when I woke up many hours later, my mom was in the living room watching TV. My sister had not yet come back. I went over to my mother and I sat beside her on the couch, and I began to apologize to her for the awful things that I'd said to her and the way I'd been so disrespectful. She began to cry, and she hugged me tightly, and she told me that she forgave me. But then she began to apologize to me. She apologized for not being the mother I deserved. She apologized for abandoning me. She apologized for not being there for me when I needed her most. She apologized for her mistakes, her drug abuse, her wrong choices, and she asked for my forgiveness. My mom and I had a very long conversation that night. Hours we talked. And that was a conversation that opened the door to healing, restoration, and forgiveness. But what I did not know was just how much a source of strength that conversation would ultimately be for me in the coming days, weeks, and months. My mom had been complaining about not feeling so well in recent weeks and had gone to the doctor. And they'd taken a biopsy of her lung and wanted to make sure that everything was okay there. So in August, my senior year began, and for the fall semester, I commuted from my sister's apartment in Elizabeth to campus using my dad's car. So although I was unable to lease a new car due to having no credit history, my dad suggested that I take his vehicle. Living in Harlem and having access to all types of public transportation, he convinced me that he didn't really need the car. And so I took him up on the offer, and I was thankful that I would now have a way to get to school during the fall semester from my sister's apartment, and that I would also be able to capitalize on the free housing opportunity at the professor's condo in the spring semester. So it wasn't a new car, but it was a free car, and it ran quite well. About 2 weeks into my school year, my mother got the results of her biopsy back, and it showed that she had stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors said that she was terminal, and she had the maximum of 6 months to live. So here I was, brothers and sisters, last year of school, no room whatsoever to allow my GPA to slip. and a mother that was terminally ill with lung cancer. I understood that as much as possible, I needed to be in two places at once. I was on borrowed time with my mother, but I was also in the last year of school, and graduating just was not an option for me. When I look back on that period of time in my life, I am able to see the hand of God guiding me in such a clear way. Sometimes we are faced with the most difficult and seemingly impossible situations, but we come out on the other side victorious, and there is no one to thank but God. He gave me the strength, courage, and wisdom to get through one of the most trying seasons in my life. So I did a lot of driving back and forth from my school in New Jersey to New York to visit my mom. At first, she was in the hospital for a while, and then they eventually moved her to Calvary Hospital in the Bronx, which was a hospice. I would bring all of my college books and assignments with me. And while she slept, I would study and do my work. And while she was awake, we would talk, laugh, sing, and just have a good time. There was a lot going on in my heart and in my mind. And to be honest with you, in retrospect, I felt like I was having an outer body experience. I was literally running on fumes. All that driving back and forth, it was just so much. But I knew I needed to do it. My heart was breaking for my mother. You know, here she was, only 46 years old, and her life was coming to an end. I knew there was a chance that she would not make it to my graduation, but I was determined not to allow her situation, which was beyond my control, to derail me from achieving my goals. I understood that long after she left this earth, I was going to have to take care of myself. And I knew the only way to do that was to have an education that would set me up for a lucrative career. So on March 3rd of 2003, my dad, my sister, my brother, and I all had a pretty cool visit with my mom. We took pictures, we told jokes, we sang, we just really enjoyed one another. And I was very grateful they all came to visit her, because in the months leading up to that, they had all made themselves very scarce. Okay, so my dad, my brother, and my sister barely visited my mom while she was in hospice. It was me constantly going to see and spend time with her. In fact, it actually got to the point where when I would arrive to her hospital room, I would see her kind of tilt her head back to see if there was anyone else behind me. And I knew that she was grateful to see me there, but she was also longing to see my brother and sister. The two of them stayed away for their own personal reasons, and although I felt some type of way about it, I reminded myself that they were well within their rights as individuals to process this impending loss however they saw fit. This was very tough on all of us, and we were all handling it so differently. What I knew was that on the day my mother left the earth, I didn't want to have to battle with guilt and grief, right? So grief was enough for me. I was determined to show up for my mother as best as I could, and when she finally rested, have absolutely no regrets or guilt eating at me. You know, I wanted to be able to say I did everything that I was supposed to do. I did everything that I wanted to do. And I did everything that I needed to do, you know, because death is so final. And I just thank God for that wisdom. Sometimes I feel like the heartfelt conversation my mother and I had just a few weeks before her diagnosis was so God ordained. You hear me? So within God's perfect timing. God knew I needed to hear her say those things before she left this earth. And he knew I needed to hear those things in order to press in and just really sacrifice during those last few months of her life. Because had we not had that conversation, I still would have been bitter. And it is quite possible that I too would have chosen not to visit her too often. I know it was the Lord who ordered my steps. He strengthened me and put on my heart to honor my mother, and for that I am eternally grateful. So on that afternoon of March 3rd, 2003, we were all together. My dad, my mom, my sister, my brother, me, and I had no idea that would be the last time I saw my mother alive. The following week was spring break for me, and I had promised my mom that I would come and spend the entire week with her, and we were definitely looking forward to that. On March 9th, I was supposed to be headed to the hospice to spend the week with my mom, That was actually a Sunday. But I called her that evening to let her know that I would instead be coming the following morning, which was a Monday. I was at my friend's house. It was getting late, and I just figured I would spend the night at my friend's house and leave early in the morning. So I called my mom. The call was relatively quick, and I remember her saying to me, "Make sure you come, okay? I have something to tell you." And I told her not to worry, that I would be there the following morning, and I told her that I loved her. That following morning was March 10th, and around 6:30 in the morning, my sister and I received a call that my mom had passed away, and that we needed to go to Calvary Hospital in the Bronx to identify her body. Listen, God does all things well, brothers and sisters. Going to the hospice to visit my dying mother regularly was weighing on my soul in a way that I can never truly explain to you. But God knew that me being in the room when she actually passed away would have been entirely too traumatic for me. Okay, so I firmly believe He allowed me to stay at my friend's house exactly where I was that night, because I would have never been able to recover from being in the room and possibly watching my mother take her last breath or waking up to her body. And the Lord knew it. Going to claim and identify her body was traumatizing. Helping to plan the funeral of a 46-year-old woman was mind-boggling. Seeing her in her casket was horrifying. And watching them close the casket for the last time was heartbreaking. It was all so final. It was all so final. After the funeral, I immediately went back to campus to get back to business. A couple of my professors offered their condolences and an opportunity for me to extend final papers and projects. There were only about 5 weeks left until graduation, so it was really prime time in terms of finals and papers and exams. I went to see my academic advisor, and she gave me some very sound advice. She looked me right in the eye, and she told me to turn down every offer for extensions. She told me to gather myself. She told me she understood how I was feeling, but that I must pull it together and finish strong. There would be time to grieve later. She told me that she'd been working in higher education long enough to confidently tell me what happens when people take extensions right before graduation. They never finish. She told me to finish strong for my mother and not to let my foot up off the gas. And that is precisely what I did. That's she and I at my graduation. And I graduated in May of that year. And although my mother was not there to see it, I was proud to have been, by the grace of God, able to push through and get it all done. My undergraduate degree had great meaning. It was proof that I was far stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. And it proved to me that I was able to overcome in the face of adversity. And it proved to me that after all I'd been through in life, I wasn't able to let those hard times stop me from achieving. And it proved to me that God was truly with me and had not allowed my foot to slip, no matter how many self-destructive situations I found myself in. So that was me. 23 years old, bachelor's degree in hand, ready for my new chapter, ready to get out there and see what the real world had to offer. I felt such a charge to live, to just live. I felt like I owed it to my mother and to myself to make the very best of my life. And I thought making money would be the answer to my problems. But I would soon learn that it didn't matter how many degrees or how high the salary or what I was able to purchase or accomplish. A life without Christ was empty and miserable, because there are certain voids that only God can fill. My heart was broken. I had just lost my mother, and she was not coming back. All that childhood trauma, it was all still there. That's really what I'm trying to get you to understand, right? So we're looking at a new chapter, right? Graduating from college, this new accomplishment, what should have been a very exciting and promising time for me. It wasn't. It was the beginning of just a downfall like nothing I could ever explain. But I am going to try to use the next video to explain exactly what that next chapter in my life looked like. And the only thing I want you guys to know for sure is that, we live in a world and we live in a time where everyone wants to feel like, secure the bag, get the money, what's next, what's better, boss up. All I want you to know is that you can secure the bag. You can absolutely secure the bag, but that does not mean joy. That does not mean peace. That does not mean healing. And so if all you have in life is the bag, yeah, I don't know what to say other than it got to the point where all I had was money, money and misery. So that's all I have for this particular video. And God willing, I will see you next time.